Well, this morning we turn our attention with our panel to a broad view of choral music in North America. Our two panelists from Canada and two panelists from the United States. I believe, no, three from Canada, one bilateral here or something. Hillary Appelstadt has the distinction of being, I believe, historically, the first member of the ACDA Executive Committee that is a Canadian. That's kind of cool, and it moves us again into this direction that I'm hoping to see ACDA take, and that is more of an American Choral Directors Association thinking vertically. We also have on our panel this morning Brainerd Blyden-Taylor, who we heard from yesterday, Canadian, also Iman Ramesh, also from Canada, and we heard from Dale Warland yesterday, who will be our sole representative of the United States. But I'll give you backup, Dale. We have a panel of questions, a set of questions that were given to us and worked through the graduate students that have been a part of the planning for this symposium, and I've sent the questions ahead of time to our panelists, and I will work from those questions this morning. I'll try to move through all 5 of those questions, so we have more panel members this morning than we did yesterday. So I'll ask the panelists to maybe speak in shorter sentences this morning so I can involve as many as possible. And our first question is this, it's a broad question, is if we were to describe and take home one impression of choral music making in your region and your observations of your region of the world, what would you want that impression to be for those that visited and heard the choral music making in your part of the country? Brainerd, could I start with you with a reaction to that thought?
Well, yes, and living in Toronto, I think it's what I would expect and what I would want to see is that anyone who came to concerts in my part of the woods would hear a variety of musics, would hear music from anywhere, really, because we have that richer tradition in our city.
Okay, good. Let me move over to Western Canada. Iman?
Well, when people ask me where I'm from, and I say British Columbia, and we get past the fact that it is not in Central America, then they say, oh, you're from Vancouver. Okay. No, actually, I'm not from Vancouver. However, the small town that I live in, which is in the north end of the Okanagan Valley, which extends down into Washington State, is almost a microcosm or a smaller version of Vancouver. Vancouver, as far as it represents Western choral music, I think is just a real hotbed of choral music making. We have 2 professional vocal ensembles, Vancouver Chamber Choir, Musica Intima, and we have a number of other ensembles who are virtually working at the professional level. We have a very fine choral department at the University of British Columbia, 3 publishing houses, so it's very active.
Dale. Now, Dale Warland, of course, is in the Minneapolis area, but
no, St. Paul.
St. Paul. Sorry, we have to drill down even smaller. Okay, but Dale is a national figure, and he's a clinician all over the United States. So I think he certainly can speak to what he sees going on.
Well, the question that was for our region, and I am Minnesota, so it probably doesn't describe what's going on in the rest of the country, because we do live in a hotbed of choral music. So starting with it, as far as the choirs are concerned, we just have an abundance of activity at all levels. And as far as if you're talking about unique features about the composition, that's another thing. But as far as activity, I think, and we're rather proud of it in some ways, but I think it's just true that we just have so much activity, and at a very high level. So it's both an abundance and performance that I think at a considerably high level. And the other thing is that we have a lot of community support. It's amazing to have so many choirs, and yet we get audiences, which is pretty incredible. So that's the other part of it. We have a lot of choral nerds in that town, or in this state. And of course, a lot of you know the strong collegiate. I think of all the states around the country, we have a strong collegiate tradition too.
Yeah. And Hillary is a relatively new returner to her home country, Toronto. Any other comments from your perspective, it's particularly after coming from North Carolina, Ohio, and now you're Canadian choral scene?
I think the one thing about the Canadian choral scene that's important is that the community organizations across the country are stronger than the schools. There's a real discrepancy, and that's a question that comes later, but in what happens because of provincial curriculums. But if you go to any choral federation across the country, you can see that in each province there are really strong community choirs, especially youth and children, but into the adult, because as those youth get older, they want somewhere to sing. So that's, I think, a great feature.
Well, you all are describing a robust choral situation, yet I think any conversation can degrade quickly into I think they've said, related to theater, that theater's been going away ever since Shakespeare's time, but yet theater is strong. I hear a lot of choral music in trouble. Now, is there a reason to be concerned? Where are the non-hot spots? Where are the areas of perhaps need that you see in your area? And what causes that need? Brainerd, go ahead.
I think that, as Hillary alluded to, the community organizations are the ones seemingly to have to pick up the slack, because I believe that you were seeing this decline in the United States earlier than we were in Canada, but certainly our school systems are very, very much letting us down in this regard. I mean, music is slipping away and slipping away. I mean, we just heard about more cuts that have occurred, and certainly over the years I have adjudicated at the festivals, both provincial and national, and we've got a major national festival coming up in May, and because of job actions in some of the schools, as well as the cuts that are occurring, a lot of the choirs in Ontario have dropped out of the festival. So it really is a challenge. And the community organizations are the ones that are having more and more to pick up that slack. And we're seeing a lot of good ones, I think, coming up, where they're beginning to try and create tiers so that they can grow.
Feeder systems.
That's right.
Yeah. Iman, how about in Western Canada?
Yeah, I would have to concur that, oh my Lord, you have great choirs here. I'm so envious. And like every school here in North Dakota has a great choir. Isn't that right? Must be. Must be, yes. So my feeling is that there is that support is probably from the community, but also from the powers higher up. And from what I can see in my little community, there are a few people doing choral music, but it's very often in spite of the powers. It's just because this particular individual feels strongly enough about singing that they go against the school policy or in spite of it and produce some kind of a choral program. But yeah, that's I think the support has to come from various directions. And so we do have community choirs, but unless you get those kids singing early and singing well, the community choirs aren't necessarily all that high caliber.
Dale, what's your observation?
Well, we're having a more difficult time in Minnesota in this whole area with instrumental music, all the way from the schools to top professional orchestras. Minnesota Orchestra has been in lockout since early fall. St. Paul Chamber Orchestra has been in lockout since early fall. St. Paul Chamber is going to survive. They've just signed a contract for the next 3 years. But Minnesota Orchestra is in desperate straits. Well, this has happened also in the high school, junior high instrumental program. There's not been the same support. So I think instrumental music in our area is having a much more difficult time for a lot. And people are just craving it so that in their desperation, in a way, the concert halls, the concerts given by choral groups now have been wonderful as far as audience turnout, but people are just really sensing a great loss in our area, and it's really quite tragic, I think. But I think we don't see the same problems, at least in Minnesota, with support of choral music in the schools, because the parents, there's been a tradition that just won't allow it to happen. So, I mean, they make it happen regardless. Now, I can't speak in great detail, but that's what I sense.
Yeah. Hillary, before you speak to Canada, you were in Ohio. Can you describe what was going on there related to this topic of school support and music for all before you left?
I think the same thing. I've been gone 3 years now, but my husband still lives there, so I'm back and forth and have still a lot of contact with teachers and friends and so forth. I think it's gradually shrinking, but there are pockets where it's still so strong. Places around Cleveland, for example, where the parents just will not let it die. But actually, I see it as being in more trouble in Toronto than I do in Ohio.
Really? And what's the politics behind that? What's going on?
The shocking thing recently is that the Toronto School Board has cut all of the itinerants in the elementary level. So then if you have no foundation, what happens after that?
Right.
And then we had this Bill 115 this year that had to do with, it was a government-imposed thing, and that's what Brainerd was alluding to in terms of the schools. They were not allowed to do extracurriculars, and there, in Ontario at least, choir is not always curricular. It's extracurricular. So that meant that a lot of schools just simply couldn't meet their choirs. And the teachers were not really allowed to meet those regardless. A few people did that, trying to do it undercover, but they're not getting credit, and the value just is not built into the system.
Okay.
So I see a lot of our music education graduates who are really passionate about teaching not having a very good prospect in our province. Now, if they're willing to go to Manitoba or some other places that are stronger, if they'll move, they can find jobs.
Okay.
I wonder if there's anybody here that knows the Brainerd High School situation, because they cut. What's the history? Because what is it now? Because it was all cut out at one time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I grew up just north of there.
But I should say, first of all, Brainerd High School has been a long tradition of absolutely the tops in the state, and then suddenly it was all the support cutting out the whole program in a high school. But what happened?
Well, there was a definite fight from the parents to.
Yes.
I mean, there was a huge community reaction.
Yeah, Mike Smith's wife, Carol, she and parents fundraised to keep the choral department position.
But they engaged a lot of us in the state so it's come back to life full blast as far as I know.
Yes.
But we just to extend. You were talking about support. We are really lucky when I think about the rest of the country. We have foundations. We have even the State Arts Board supports touring of all things. I mean, you would think that would just be frosting on the cake. Commissioning. It's really quite phenomenal when you think of it. So there is support real support with real dollars.
Do you make any distinction between what's going on in urban settings to what maybe you describe as, I think, provincial? I mean, is there a dichotomy there? Are there some haves and have-nots, or is this just a universal top-down and it applies everywhere? Is there a distinction?
I don't know.
I think not enough to be significant.
Okay.
No.
Okay. And the catalyst that makes a difference when things are in threat, it's community action, it's parents taking up the arms, and yeah. Well, let me shift gears then to what we're singing. Brainerd, you described you could hear everything in your area. The level of composition, I mean, what do you sense that is improving? Is there more interest? Is there world interest? Is it local composers? Is it all of the above? What do you see happening in composition particularly?
I mean, my sense is that more and more, particularly in the, how shall I put this? You know, those feeder systems that I was talking about, groups, choirs that do that, there seems to be a real interest in looking beyond what one would consider sort of your standard sort of European classical choral music or British, or there seems to be more interest in that. Certainly, the bigger choirs tend not to be quite as diverse in their programming as some of the smaller choirs. But one of the things that I would like to see more happen, and I mean, I sat for several years on the board and chaired the music committee of the Toronto Arts Council, and and they asked me to do that. And they came to me and said, because you're black and because you're good, and we want you to talk to the black community. And so I had to say to them, well, you know, that's a misnomer in a sense, because there are several black communities that make up the black community. And that is very true for a lot of the other communities in the city. I'm aware that there are a lot of choirs that are happening, you know, in the Chinese community or in the other communities, and we don't always know what that is, because they do it, and they do it very well in their communities. But how do we get them to speak to each other and to cross-pollinate and those kinds of things, you know? So there is quite a variety, and it's bringing it all together that's sometimes challenging.
Interesting. Yeah. As a composer, you've been in this business a couple of years. How do you feel the terrain is now for the choral composer?
I think it depends upon the choral composer, and to some degree, I hate to say it, it depends somewhat on the flavor of the month. My own personal experience is that as of 2008, there was a sudden drop-off in commissioning, which I think reflected everybody's nervousness about financial matters. To some degree, for me, it's recovered a bit, but I'm of a certain generation, and I'm not necessarily the flavor of the month, and I sometimes make some demands on singers. So my experience, my personal experience is that, on the other hand, I mean, I'm getting off topic here, but listen, you have to expect this of me. Because I got this from my mother. She said, if you don't know how to answer the question, then steer it to something that you do know something about. Well, blame my mother. At my stage in life, I don't really feel that I particularly need to write everything. I mean, everybody else is writing it, so I can write the things that I want to write. So, very well. But I think that there are some composers who are very popular and very much in demand. How long they will remain on the cutting edge, I don't know, because the cutting edge is the soonest blunted. But that's how it is. I really don't know whether, if you took a survey of kind of the amount of commissioning dollars, the total dollars that's happening, and you plotted it against some timeline, whether what that graph would show. But I think it in terms of the commissioning, I think that there are groups who are really serious, and in some cases I have one commission that I'm working on that I'm really scratching my head about, which sort of addresses one of the points that you're going to bring up, and that has to do with the cultural aspects. I've been asked to write a work for Musica Intima, which is a small 12-voice chamber choir, and they've asked me to write a work which is based upon a Stalo legend. Now, in British Columbia, we have a number of native tribes, and the Stalo are the people who live in the Chilliwack area, which is kind of the upper Fraser before he gets into the mountains. Okay, so the Chilliwack area. And quite honestly, I have, this is totally out of my realm out of my comfort zone. But I figure, well, life's too short to be always comfortable. So I'm taking it on. But so there is exploration in new directions.
Okay. Yeah. And well, let me move to Dale. Dale, you said yesterday repertoire is your cornerstone. All right. You've seen a lot of repertoire. How is it looking out there?
Well, speaking about the whole United States, it's just an incredible amount of composition for choirs that's being produced. I would say Emont talked about demanding. I think we're pretty conservative in the big picture. There are certain exceptions, but first of all, there's an awful lot of choral music being written, and especially in Minnesota, we have many good composers. If I want to talk in technical terms, it tends to be very homophonic, very homorhythmic. I talked before I came. I talked a little bit with Tarek O'Regan, who is an Englishman, a Brit who spends about half his time in the States, and he's got a really good perspective on it. But he too misses counterpoint. I mean, as technical and as simple as that is, everything is so homophonic and homorhythmic. It's beautiful, but we tend to go for texture and sounds rather than motives. Just again, technically. The other trend that I've noticed, especially with younger composers, that we're going to more prose rather than poetry, or quotes, just interviews and quotes, instead of Teasdale or Shakespeare or whatever. We tend to set prose, which is a kind of neat trend. But it's an incredible amount of choral music. But I think we're pretty conservative overall.
Okay. Hillary, you're involved with, I know, commissioning and working with living composers. What's your perspective on this?
I understand exactly what Dale is saying about the homophonic kind of, but I do think there are people, we've just commissioned Ruth Watson Henderson to write something. This is her 80th year, and she's going to write it for all of the choirs at University of Toronto, plus our resident children's choir. That woman is not afraid of counterpoint. And one of the reasons for asking her was that I know that we're going to get that multi-textured kind of thing from her. Who was I talking to
Textures
yesterday?
and sound are a big thing right now.
They are, but I think that, and if kids aren't singing Bach and those things, they never learn to sing counterpoint. So I hope that somebody still gives them that variety. It's important vocally too.
I've literally seen people in reading sessions jump up and applaud when they see just a snippet of a canon or something going on. It's so refreshing to see. And I'm not so sure when I get the reactions that people want more Mendelssohn and Bach, if they actually want more German pietism or they actually want more counterpoint. So it should be a little bit of both. Culturally, let's look what we've talked about a little bit of the political issues and the tax base and politicians and this and that. But in the water, what's going on culturally that you see in your region that affects our choral work? And in this, I can even dip over into audience reaction and that important public that we have to think about. Some of us do when we're performing. What's going on culturally in Toronto and the region?
Again, I think I alluded to a little bit of that just now when I said that I don't think we know enough about all the choirs and that are performing in all the communities. Mm-hmm. What I see is when there are choirs who are a bit more adventurous, who will program a variety of things. The public really appreciates that. Mm-hmm. The audience is very interested. I think most of the audiences that I'm aware of mm-hmm. are interested to know different things. I mean, it certainly is one of the things that motivates the music making I do, mm-hmm. is trying to explore a lot of different things. I think that there still is so much more going on in Toronto. I can't speak for the country in general, but that we are not aware of. Mm-hmm. We, as a concert-going audience, could be more aware if we wanted to be, mm-hmm. and maybe folks are not sure how to sort of drill down into different communities to find out what's going on. Uh-huh. So there's. On the surface, seems to be a certain staidness in concert going. But if you just explore a little bit, mm-hmm. I think you find, that communities do that within their own communities. How do we get them all to come see each other's work? Uh-huh. Is I think interesting part of our big challenge.
Interesting.
And I just two things. One is that a lot of choirs in Canada, I think, are very interested now, as they are in the States, in social justice. Mm-hmm. So that has broadened the base of the kind of programming that they do. And the other thing that I've noticed is more integration with poets, with visuals at concerts, and I don't see it as being gimmicky. I mean, lots of times it's a really nice collaboration. And it seems to draw audiences in because mm-hmm. we are such a visual society now. Mm-hmm. So I've noticed that, and not some things I've seen on the East Coast as well. Mm-hmm. I'm not as familiar with the West.
Yeah, how about the West Coast programming and thinking about our audience?
Well, you mentioned yesterday about thinking vertically. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, Canada is a very horizontal country.
It is. It's a long one.
Yeah, and most of the population is right along there. So I'm afraid that we're sort of aware of what happens here and here, but we do tend to sometimes work in a bit of isolation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would say that British Columbia, certainly Vancouver. Let's say British Columbia as a whole has benefited from a number of different cultural or groups. Maybe, I don't know whether to call them ethnic groups or cultural groups. But so, for instance, initially the British choral tradition, which started up in the Vancouver area, but then also significant groups such as the Mennonites in the Fraser Valley, the Doukhobors in the interior, who just do their thing. Yeah. The very, very large Chinese community in the Vancouver area. So I don't know that they are particularly looking to cross over and meet each other somewhere. They're probably generally self-sufficient or feel self-sufficient. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But as I mentioned, the occasional explorations into the First Nations traditions, although First Nations didn't really have any kind of a they had unison singing, right. but not really what we think of the Western choral tradition. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who knows?
Rainer, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I do. One thing I might sort of interject from into the conversation. I was talking a lot about the different communities that we have. I think at an upper level, when it comes to concert halls presenting and stuff like that, that's also a challenge that we're faced with. Mm-hmm. And I know that there is a gentleman at the Scarborough campus of the University of Toronto who started an organization called Cultural Pluralism in the Arts. And he has tried to get several performing arts organizations, some choral, some dance, some theater and those kinds of things, together with presenters from the better halls, around the GTA. Together at the same table to sort of talk about this and to look at the different demographics that are happening around the city, and to say to these presenters, talk to us, work with us. Let's show you what kind of art is living in and around you. Let's get you familiar with what you might be interested in presenting in your concert halls, so that you aren't just doing the same thing.
Wow.
So that's one of the pots that we're trying to stir right now, to from a presenting point of view.
That's exciting. Yeah, that's exciting. Dave?
Well, certainly in Minnesota and in the Midwest, there are both cultural and social issues that shape, inspire choirs, because we have worship communities, cultural communities. Even we're still enjoying being Norwegian, some of us, and Norwegian choirs, and certainly African American. So, but there, of course, collegiate communities, gay pride, elderly communities, former choirs. But we also have gone pretty deep into very social issues, dementia. The Minnesota Choral, for instance, has done programs on homeless and dementia, and also, Terry O'Regan reminded me that a lot of choirs are building the programs around environmental issues and warfare. But it's still, in general, I think we're in a pretty conservative, musically conservative, but social things really have played an important role. I'd be curious to ask an aside question, because it just suddenly occurred to me with these people talking about Canadian music, what sort of percentage or how prevalent are there composers making a full-time living as composers? Because it's pretty amazing in the United States now, and especially in Minnesota, that the number of composers that are working full-time, that's a new phenomenon to a lot of us. And I think it's an indication. And when I say composers, I'm thinking about, they're not just writing choral music, but quite often that's primary. We take a person like Steve Paulus, for instance, who writes everything, but we haven't discussed it, but I bet you a big percentage of his income is choral. And composers quite often feel it's beneath them to write for chorus, and they're not writing opera and symphonic music. But you press them a little bit, and I bet you they're making most of their living on writing choral music, and most of them love it. It's not doing it because they have to. But I'd be curious what the percentage or how strong it is.
It's an interesting question. I look at it with American Choral Directors Association as emergent levels of people just beginning to scratch the idea of it, students moving into it. We have a Brock Student Composition Contest, an award. And then we have these composers that have found a little bit of commercial success and actually have had a few publications and are singing. And then we have another level where they're really emerging into the possibility that they could do this full time. And that's usually when I get a phone call or a little bit of a lobbying for more presence at a conference, more things to happen so that they can showcase who they are. They're even giving exhibit space so they can present themselves. So you're on to something there. There is, to me, an emergent level of that ability, and I certainly hear their desire. Some of them want to hang out.
I just know that in the 70s, when I was really getting going, commissioning was not heard of. I mean, rarely. Now everyone is commissioning. It's the thing to do. And so somebody's getting that money. Somebody is, and I know a lot of them that are getting that money. But I'm curious in Canada if that's also true, because it's happening all over the United States in a little bit of pockets, but it's pretty generally spread.
I mean, my sense is that there are people who are being commissioned to write things, but I think like you, I mean, I know when I look at it, the Vancouver Chamber Choir.
Yes.
I mean, they commission a ton,
Yes.
and I'm not sure how they support it. They've built a community, just like Vocal Essence and others. I mean, it's because I've heard Philip present back in 2002 about his commissioning club that he started and whatever. For a lot of us, it's coming up with the money. And
Well, sure.
the commissioning dollars have shrunk across the country. And I mean, Iman can attest to this as well. And oftentimes when we're going up for commissions, everyone is going to the same pot. So orchestras, opera companies, small choirs or whatever, and that pot has shrunk.
Yeah.
So
well, our pots, it's amazing how people, if they get brought in some way, how you can get individuals to support, and that's what's
we're needing to figure out how to do that better.
Where it becomes a thing to do. One of the first commissions that turned out to be quite sizable was once when we went to I forget a big major company, and we needed typewriters and Xerox machines or whatever they called at that time, and I remembered that George Shearing, I'd always wanted to commission something that involved jazz. I mean, every year, jazz country, we're not doing anything vocally or chorally with jazz. And I just said, well, they obviously were not interested in typewriters and things. It was a major company. And I just happened to say, well, would you ever be interested in commissioning a choral work? And I have in mind a George Shearing. And it just lit up like this. Mm-hmm. And we walked out with $25,000. And at that time, that was a lot of money. Mm-hmm. But you get people really... There are people out there that really have money that love new things. Yeah. And so
I gotta find them because I got ideas. I just need to find them.
Start small and have a success, but because it is difficult to depend on state and national funding nowadays, because social issues have taken over.
I think to really get at a way to get at your question. One of the things that we're seeing, and I have strong documentation, is that because individual composers are having success, are meeting commissions, traditional publishing, it's no surprise to any of you that it's probably 75% lower than it was 10 years ago.
Well, and it's conservative. Yeah, I mean, that you hit on a very big thing. Yeah. Publishing, they got to make a living too,
right?
And so, what gets published, it's rare that it's something really demanding.
Because it's become a huge risk now, and frankly, I don't think anybody. And I've been in the seats in the rooms of the majors, and I don't think anybody is able to take that risk right now. Yeah. And so what's happening is the composers aren't going to stop doing what they're doing. No. They've found a new way to get it out, and of course, it's put a new pressure on the marketing piece of that, which is what traditional publishers.
It's a whole different.
That is a whole different subject. So we won't go there right now, but maybe we'll do that over lunch today. I've got one more question I want to zip down through you all, and that is, it's really about the tone and the character of what you've alluded to. Lots of choral communities. There's probably a lot of different tonal concepts going on there, different sounds. Is that, are you hearing a homogeneous kind of 40 years ago in the United States, choirs that came, you can identify them to one of 6 different schools that they came from, or tonally, are you hearing the opposite, or in between? Rainer, what do you hear around you when it comes to vocal production and the tone of the choir? Is it diverse? Is it all over the map?
Wow.
I start with you every time. That's not fair.
That's all right. That's all right. I'd be interested to see what my other colleagues have to say from Canada. But no, what I was going to say is, my sense of it is that although there is some exploration going on, by and large, there is a pretty staid sound for the most part.
Can you characterize that a little bit in terms of tone and?
I'd say, it's that pretty standard British expectation that you would.
Okay. Okay, I'm moving
I'll go to
Western
Hillary
Canada.
and see
Is
what
there,
she has
outside of those indigenous folks upriver, what?
Well, there is a Balkan ladies choir in the North Okanagan. They definitely have a different tonal concept.
Okay.
But other than that, I'm being slightly facetious. No, I don't think there's a deliberate attempt to achieve a particular style other than something that's open and natural and not necessarily, that straight British cathedral choir sound particularly, but I know there are also choirs that strive for that, but I don't think there's anything that really characterizes the BC sound as such.
Dale, do you?
Well, I don't know. Again, it's a tough question to answer. But I asked Terry O'Regan, who comes from the Brit. He's a Brit. This very question because I kind of wanted to get his perspective. Being an outsider, and I'll just read what he said. He said, compared to the UK, choirs of the Midwest seem to have a richer spectrum of sound. Richer. Whatever that means, an equal blend from bass up to soprano, almost like a single instrument. So he's saying something. This is not the European sound, quote unquote, on the whole, although it's kind of sound, quote unquote. People like Stephen Layton, a lot of you know his work, try to emulate with polyphony, his group. So from his perspective, there is a uniquely American sound, on whatever that is. It's pretty hard to describe.
Hillary?
The Canadian sound is leaner to my ear.
Okay.
It's not as lean as it used to be. When I lived there before, it was very much driven in Toronto, especially, well, on the East Coast too, where I grew up, by that British kind of absolutely pure tone. And sometimes I hear that, for example, in the Eisler Singers, but there's a little more warmth now. I find my students can adjust their sound because that's what they often hear, so they'll adjust to Palestrina, and yet they love to sing Brahms, and they all want to be soloists and end up at the Canadian Opera Company, which is our equivalent of the Met, or somewhere. But they understand from the choral culture how to make that leanness, and it's not pure non-vibrato. But I've really noticed that coming from the States.
Okay.
It's closest to what I think of the Minnesota kind of sound, like the St. Olaf sound or that kind of
I asked
thing.
another composer the same question, and I just decided to write their answers down. He said, in the Midwest, he's talking about there's a preference for soft, ethereal, light sounds as opposed to deep, dark, and rooted sounds, and he was using Morton Lauridsen versus Tormes kind of. And I think the composition and the background of those composers has a lot to do with it. I mean, Skip Lauridsen has a certain thing already, and we follow, whereas Tormes has another kind of expectation, and we follow, I think. So I think our choirs in the Midwest, at least, tend to try to emulate what the composer probably had in mind. But we're still, I think, in the camp where he still talks about it as being soft, ethereal, and more light.
Again, it's interesting because, as I said, there are a number of ethnic choirs in the area, and so you can go to a concert of in the Korean community, and you will hear the difference there, particularly when they sing music that is of their ethnicity. But more and more they are endeavoring to emulate the sort of British or American sound. So when they sing other things, I mean, a lot of what you will hear are those kinds of tones. With my ensemble, one of the things that I do when I audition is I ask my singers to sing two very divergent pieces when they come in, because I want to hear whether they can color their instrument to suit the variety of styles that I try to approach. And that's the kind of singer I'm looking for.
It's exciting. Well, it brings us back to why this symposium is important, why performance practice actually goes beyond earlier definitions into choral performance practice now, and sort of an awareness that we're becoming with the literature and our exposure to other musics. Well, you all, thank you for letting me quiz you this morning. I think this is very enlightening, and our panelists, of course, are here for the next 2 days. I hope you'll follow up with additional discussions with them. Would you thank them with me?